On today's episode of Baking with Bingaman, our celebrity guest is going to be the Swedish chef.
Good morning and welcome to Baking with Bingaman. Last week we talked about herb gardens and what they need to grow.
As we learned in our previous lesson, autotrophs are organisms that make their own food, like plants, algae, and some microorganisms. Plants take carbon dioxide from the environment and water through their root system. With sunlight to fuel a chemical reaction between carbon dioxide and water, the cell generates sugar for food and oxygen, which is released back into the environment. This process is called photosynthesis. Keep in mind that sugar is not energy. Sugar can be used to make energy in cells. The process of metabolizing sugar into energy is cellular respiration. There are many different types of sugar, and the sugar made during photosynthesis is called sucrose. As you can see, it is a process that also involves inputs and outputs like photosynthesis. During cellular respiration, sugar and oxygen are the inputs, and energy, water, and carbon dioxide are the outputs.
This week, we're going to look at the very most basic, most important thing to bake ever, and that is bread. Now, in order to get started, we're going to need to make sure we have all our things. Chef, are you going to follow along with me? Great. And you can follow along at home as well. First off, we need our ingredients. For bread, we need 4 simple ingredients. We need flour, salt, water, and a very important ingredient, yeast. Can you handle that, Chef? Alright, so our first ingredient we need in our bucket is water. We're going to use 3 cups of warm water. You are measuring this, right, Chef? Then we're going to need our salt. We need the same amount of yeast, 1.5 tablespoons. Our yeast is a dry looking granule powder. It's made up of millions of little cells that are going to wake up when they hit the hot water.
Yeast is a living cell that is in a state of dormancy until it is given warm water and something to eat, such as sugar or starches in the flour. Sugar is a more simple molecule, also known as sucrose. Sucrose is composed of glucose and fructose particles that are joined together. Starches are more complex molecules. Starches involve many glucose particles that are joined together in a long chain. Regardless of the cell using starch or sugar, the food needs to be broken down into very simple sugars, such as glucose, so it is small enough to diffuse into the cell to use. Starch molecules are far too large to fit into a yeast cell and cannot diffuse. That's why everything has to be broken down into glucose. The yeast takes the glucose and the oxygen from the air to turn it into energy for itself. Then the yeast exhales carbon dioxide. The exhalation of carbon dioxide by the yeast gets trapped in the dough and causes the dough to swell or rise. Bakers call this leavening. When the bread bakes, pockets of carbon dioxide leave holes in the bread that give it a nice and fluffy texture.
Did you get that, Chef? Measuring is important. We're going to give that a stir. And then our last ingredient is the flour. We're going to need 6.5 cups. You are measuring that, right? Stir it up and stir it up and stir it up until all of the flour has gotten wet. There we go. We need to wait. So we have to give that living yeast time to eat some of that flour for us. The yeast are going to take in the flour, burn it for energy. They're going to give off carbon dioxide. And that's what's going to make our bread puff up. We need to give that time, about 2 hours at least, let that rise. So what do we do for 2 hours? Chloe, you want to help me out with that?
Your cells also do cellular respiration. Your lungs inhale oxygen. You ingest carbohydrates from food you eat. Your digestive system breaks the carbohydrates or starches down into glucose that can diffuse into your cells because they're small enough. This glucose and oxygen is transported to your cells by the circulatory system. After the glucose and oxygen diffuse into the cell, they go to the mitochondria, where it reacts to form ATP, or energy for your body, to use in cellular processes.
Oh, Chef, I really wish you had measured that stuff. Bread dough has risen up real nicely. I'm going to pull out about 1/4 of the dough. We have to turn it. We're going to keep rolling it underneath itself. I want to form a kind of loaf of bread called a baguette. Alright, so we need to wait for 15 minutes. We also need to wait for our oven to heat up.
Waste products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide is exhaled through the lungs, and water is carried by your circulatory system to your kidneys, where it is filtered out and excreted from your body as urine. So cells make energy through a process called cellular respiration, where sugar and oxygen react in the cells to produce energy, and waste products are water and carbon dioxide. This is what your cells do, but also other types of cells, like plants.
You like that? You like that? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to set the oven for 450 degrees. A nice steamy hot oven for 15 minutes. Bread. Look at this. A lovely loaf of fresh baked bread.